Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to the minigame podcast. We'll do some warm up for about an hour, then we'll jump into the video game news. Today is Monday, February 17th. I had kind of a hassle. Anytime my Roku TV decides to either crash or reboot, it messes up the order of which windows want to open on. So Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, which I use for the backing music that's playing right now, was opening in the wrong screen. And I had to actually Google it and figure out that if you hit Windows Shift and then an arrow key, you can move full screen apps like Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel around to different monitors. Which I was pretty sure there was a shortcut key, but I didn't remember what it was if I had ever known it in the first place. We'll scroll down the top 24-hour concurrent video game players chart from SteamDB while I talk here. If you missed it, which you may very well have, I didn't stream on Friday because my internet modem, fiber modem, broke. And so I just didn't have internet for approaching 48 hours, which is kind of a minor zombie apocalypse of sorts. Of course, I am lucky enough to have enough backup entertainment to keep me entertained enough, not having any kind of like real cable TV of any sort. I have enough entertainment just on a local hard drive server plugged into my router to keep me entertained potentially for months and months and months, although the selection is hand-picked and somewhat lackluster. Certainly it's not going to be the same experience as going along Hulu and seeing something new, or any other service like Netflix or Apple TV Plus. But that did keep me busy enough as far as side things to do while I'm resting between cleaning and decluttering my house, which in the past weekend, cleaning and decluttering my house has turned more into just doing some remodeling projects I've wanted to do for a long time and just haven't had time to get around to it. There's still cleaning and decluttering to go, but I frankly just need a little bit of a break from that. And all in all, this is not a great situation, and probably yet another symptom of just ADHD. Although at this point, even joking that one has ADHD might become dangerous in the United States. I'm not going to dive deep into the recent happenings of the United States, but yeah, I will mention that. But yeah, I'm getting the house more the way I want it, less just trying to do the bare minimum now to get it to a point where I can start renting out rooms, which in a lot of ways I have plenty of time. I have more time than I really would have wanted, so I might as well be doing something there. And one of those things is that I put in a smart motion sensors on a three-way switch in the hallway. So there's a motion sensor at the back exit of the hallway, and there's a motion sensor at the front entrance of the hallway. And while they are frankly about only one of a couple of models that I even could find that would work with the Tuya infrastructure or be smart at all, and they work fine in a lot of aspects, they are somewhat lackluster. First of all, I'd say whether you're looking for a smart motion sensor or not, you first of all have to know can it be connected to a three-way? Probably one could be connected to a three-way, but in most cases you want at least two. And then you're going to want to know, does it have a vacancy mode? Is it a vacancy motion sensor, or is it just a motion sensor? The difference being there is that these switches will detect motion, turn on the lights for a very specific amount of time, that being smart you can adjust that time, and that you are definitely getting a lot more adjustability and a lot more options, and you're also getting the advantage of not having to go and take off a switch or a faceplate to a switch to turn some kind of dials physically on the switch to adjust settings. So smart definitely is the way to go if you want to make any kind of tweaks. But without vacancy as an option, it just turns on and then it goes off. So if you're standing in the hall doing a jig, dancing a jig, it still will go off while you're right in front of the motion sensor after that set amount of time. So like, I have it set for a minute just for experimental purposes, and it's like, yeah, that without that vacancy option, without it resetting that delay till off every time it senses motion, you are literally only really capable of using these in a fairly limited number of places, and the suggested places may give you a hint as to whether a motion sensor switch has a vacancy mode or not. If they're suggesting that it's good for hallways, stairways, parking lots, things like that, then they are talking about transitional places where you transition from one area to another. You don't stay in that area for a very long amount of time. That indicates that it doesn't have a vacancy mode. Now, I've contacted the people, and this is the beauty of a smart switch in particular, is you can contact them and say, hey, can you add a vacancy mode? Odds are they won't. If they did, the odds are that they would put it in a new device or a new version that they would resell to you. Odds are high that the sellers of this specific model are really just flipping it from some other OEM manufacturer, and they don't really have any major control over it at all. But yeah, so there's a lot higher odds that you won't get any feedback or any kind of improvement. And if you contact Tuya directly, they will give you no help and they'll say this is a specific device thing, even if it really is maybe more of a generic software thing that Tuya actually is supposed to be supporting. They're going to blame the device manufacturers and not take any real responsibility or care about it. And that is certainly the risk of Tuya smart devices. On the other hand, name another smart device company that really will implement anything new without selling you a majorly expensive piece of hardware, because they're all that way. They're all terrible in that case. Is at best you have a couple of good ones that do kind of consistently update their apps, but nowadays a lot of the updates for the apps are literally just to sell you more software plugins, DLC, effectively, for smart devices. So yeah, without the vacancy option, it's less useful than I really would like it to be. But it does work. On the other hand, there is also a argument that since in this hallway I'm doubling up and I've decided to go ahead and put in the track lighting, which will have smart bulbs for inside each of the light sockets, then I'm effectively just doubling up as far as having smart devices on smart devices, and it very well may have been a better case to leave the three-way switches as three-way switches, dumb three-way switches that were already there, and just have those be on all the time, and then have the smart bulbs be turned on by some other presence sensor and turned off by some other presence sensor, whether it was a millimeter wave presence sensor. There's even a possibility that you might lose one of the three-way switches and take the connection there to put in like a millimeter wave presence sensor instead. Whereas a good millimeter presence sensor will do a way better job of knowing if somebody is still in the hall or not, and will send out the signals as far as whether presence is still being detected or not. And that's what you really want in the sense of looking for some kind of vacancy detector, particularly if you have like classrooms or offices and you're trying to see if there's actually anybody in a much larger area, not just a small area in a hallway where people are funneled into a narrow section of square footage, and the angle of a passive infrared presence sensor will definitely see a person in that case. Otherwise, I can't really complain about it missing features because I can't really think of any other features that you would want that it doesn't have. Could have had better instructions. It's about the second biggest criticism I can make for them, and that's true for almost all Tuya smart devices, is that they're written by Chinese people and the instructions are somewhat complicated. The wiring for three-way switches in particular was super complicated. But yeah, it can be timed, it can be scripted. They don't send out quite the right signals when they detect presence or motion, so it's not something that really would integrate into a security system as far as, hey, this is also a motion detector that when you're in an armed mode would actually set off an alarm. It might do that. I don't have an alarm system to really test that out, but it doesn't feel like it would do that. Certainly it doesn't feel like you could have other things turn on in that way. And it doesn't seem like it really sends out a signal when it detects the light level being brighter, but that's fine because it would basically have to send out a luminance signal of certain brightness, and while that would be nice, it's probably asking a little too much. You can't really adjust the indicator lights on it, which it might be nice if you could have certain times in which the indicator lights on the switch would go off or change color, but yeah, it's not really a big deal. You can't fine-tune the light rejection levels. You can either set it to a default setting, or you can say the brightness that it sees right now should be its level. As far as that is the point where if it is this bright, it won't turn on the lights, which in my case I just turned off the luminance switch sensor anyways, because there's basically never a case where I don't want that hallway to turn on the lights when it sees somebody, because the hallway is incredibly in the middle of a house, just very poorly designed. It really needed like a skylight or something in it. It's just like crazy that there's no windows anywhere close to putting any exterior light into the hallway, so it's just incredibly dark. And increasingly I'm finding that seems like just a continuing issue of my house, is that it was, I think, built by somebody who had no idea how to build a house in ways that are kind of crazy. Every time I pull out the wiring, the electrical wiring is done very, very weirdly, in the sense that his pigtails are too long, so there's just like extra copper, although in my case it's actually aluminum wire in most cases, that is sticking out the back and could spark. Not really likely to, but it just screams this is not a person who has an idea on how long to trim the wires and make a pigtail, which in fairness, decades ago you probably were either learning from a book or just figuring it out yourself, and nobody was telling you the right way to do things. But yeah, there's aluminum to copper connections all over the place. Sometimes the copper has the antioxidant goo over it, which if I see copper wire, that means it was added later. But the antioxidant goo goes on the aluminum wire, not the copper wire. Wires are just twisted too long, and as such they're sticking out the back end of caps. Again, just ways in which something could spark, although once something is in a box it's unlikely to actually spark. But yeah, it's all pretty obvious stuff to me, even as somebody who really doesn't even know what he's doing either, but does have some electrical education, a couple of years of electronics, although it wasn't really residential wiring electronics. But I've also had the advantage of YouTube and watching other people remodel and learn. So yeah, I'm going through Wagyu connectors like crazy, which, yeah, you might as well buy those in bulk at this if you're going to start a project, because you're going to go through them really quickly. You're going to go through the 5 connectors fairly quickly, and the 3 connectors fairly quickly, and the 2 connectors a lot less. In the straight line 1-to-1 connectors, which are 2 connectors but in a different form factor, you're potentially not going to use as much, because they just feel like they're going to take up more space and be more difficult to squeeze into the back of boxes, which, yeah. I've also decided to, since it's just so expensive to hire people, and it's actually fairly difficult to get people to show up for smaller projects, since I have nothing but time, I'm gonna give it a go to teach myself to how to patch gypsum drywall. I've got some holes that need to be patched, and I'm gonna give it a go to teach myself to do touch-up paint work and just accomplish what I want to accomplish all by myself. Of course, it will take me way longer. Arguably, if I learn correctly and do a good job, I probably will do it as well, if not better, than a lot of people. Inherently, when you get a handyman, they want to work fast. They've lived in this world where everything is expected to be done fast. So it can be hard to break somebody of that mentality and say, hey, this is fine detail work, and I actually want it to be done well. And so I don't want you just to take the biggest paint roller you have, and go up and down walls as fast as possible, dripping paint and leaving globs. Yeah, which is exactly what I don't want. I want somebody to roll paint. I'm not going to ask you to take a fine tip paintbrush and paint a wall. That's crazy, although doing that on the edges probably makes some sense. But I want you to have the consistency of the paint right. I don't want globs. I want it to look good. I want every part to have equal coverage, and I don't think that's that crazy. Of course, I may be reporting back in a few weeks or days that it went horribly. Frankly, the sanding and patching of holes in the drywall is going to be the more difficult thing. And there's something about old work boxes in particular there that I'm not really sure how you make and install an old work box and then put a put mud over it and on the edges and make that smooth and make that disappear. As far as the edges, usually there's a faceplate that covers up where an old work electrical box might be seen, but in the case of the bathroom vanity, it's actually a little smaller than the work box was, which is interesting. Maybe I got the wrong size box. Anyways, I'm supposed to be talking about video games, and I'm not. And I'm not going to for a little bit longer. I did also, as far as my catch-up, I thought today I'd be a little bit more warmed up today, but I guess I'm not. I managed to work on the beginning of another project for content creators, and so I want to show off where I've started there. Right now it's a very first pass rudimentary Excel sheet, and generally I'm calling it Eat the Mic. What it's supposed to be is eventually, it don't even have the pie chart showing anything here, several rings within each other of words and phrases for content creators, heavily inspired by improv and by shock jock radio that I have listened to a lot of. Ron and Fez, I listen to basically their same shows from years ago over and over again on a daily basis. It's really approaching a level of insanity how much I can just listen to the best of Ron and Fez over and over again. And they were going on Sirius XM radio and doing shock jock ridiculous things. Well, from being inspired from that, also there's some Opie and Anthony, not so much Howard Stern. I haven't actually listened to Howard Stern, and probably should. Like the best of Howard Stern, if you can actually find it on YouTube, which I bet you can't. But sorry, taking a break mid-sentence there. The point is that these would be rings that you could print out as little pie slices, put on Velcro, and stick to the back of probably a prize wheel, is my thought. And then what this would be is that you would have a producer type person during a broadcast, whether you're making that for YouTube or Twitch or whatever. That producer type person could take the prize wheel, which you would use the prize wheel as a prize wheel when you're doing prizes, turn it around, and would have these rings to point to. This is a way of conveying an idea without saying it out loud or it being seen on camera, which inherently you interrupt any kind of broadcast if you're telling somebody on camera to eat the mic. That phrase is pretty common, so I imagine most people know what that means. What it means is get up on that mic as close as possible so you're nice and loud. Which that was probably too loud in my case, but I was doing it for example. Other things, basic things, like don't touch the microphone because that would make noise, it touching the microphone. Although I'm not even sure that picked up in that case when I was touching the microphone. Put on your headphones. A lot of people don't put on their headphones, or they put it on one ear and then they're not hearing anything that's being added to the audio mix as far as sound effects or maybe even some kind of instructions from other producers being whispered into the headphones. You certainly can have talkback features like that. Some mic people might be able to turn up their own mic. The mic is on, obviously, just in case somebody is whispering or saying something. Turn down the mic, turn down your headphones, turn up the headphones. Ideas like that. But yeah, the idea is that there's going to be different concepts and rings for different things. And mostly on my first pass, I've thrown in some basic things that need to be in different rings. Certainly things that are asked is can you curse or not, depending on the type of show. Sometimes it's you can curse, You can't curse, but you're going to be beeped. You can lightly curse, or you can just curse up a storm. You should be family friendly. You can be, scientifically speaking, talking about sexual things. You can be lewd. You can be downright pornographic. Depends on your show as far as what you want to direct to people and let them know. Are you doing a test show? Are you doing a pre-record? Are you on a delay? Are you live? These are things you might set very much at just the beginning of a show. And there is even a possibility amongst these rings that you might even have a clock hand that is just counting up, showing when you need to put in a commercial break or hold for a break. Mute when you eat, mute when you drink. Don't have any liquids near the wires because you're actually going to get shot. Some of the subgroups, and there's probably a whole bunch of more ideas certainly that can be added to this. And this is something that I may just have to make more public to get public feedback on. But yeah, some of the sub rings that I've thought about as far as a danger level, as far as if somebody is fairly controversial, this certainly is examples of like shock jock radio experiences where it's gone really bad. You might want to try and curb them just like running head into actual conflict, straight up possible fights. I mean, it's not unheard of that that you have like Jesse the Body Ventura with what is it? Jim Norton is kind of a classic example of a fight that really almost broke out on in the radio presentation. It didn't go into anything actual physical, but it definitely felt like it was getting close to that. And I'm pretty sure there's probably been examples where there have been actual real fights. Not to mention there have been plenty of theater of the mind fights, which we'll talk about that in a second. So by having a ring saying, hey, you're going good, just keep going on this topic, this is good, that would be your default. You always want as much content as good. But then you could say, hey, wait, you're going into kind of a controversial topic or something that is angering the people in the room. Maybe you pivot a little bit. Or you have a side here where it's just like, hey, I need you to be quiet while I do an ad read. Which you'll see that happen a lot in podcasts where all of a sudden somebody will start doing an ad read and the guests on the show are talking during the ad read and don't realize that an ad read is going on, which is a fault of a producer, certainly. So yeah, you can have, I was thinking originally this might even be like red light, yellow light, green light type things, but text is probably better. Ideas of pass the conversation over to somebody else. You've been talking too long, basically. Somebody else wants to talk or should talk. And then you have straight up the highest danger levels of, hey, just wrap up, do your plugs, and go. And then you have the highest danger level of, don't even do your plugs, leave right now. Take off the headphones, don't even finish your sentence, leave. Which, honestly, in a lot of situations, a leave now might not work at all. And you may straight up have to call security and have somebody drug out of the room. And so you really don't want to get to that. You really don't want to get to wrap up and leave. Or leave now. And that's something certainly that this concept, as far as a way of producers having these pre-printed phrases instead of having to say it out loud and ruin the content you're creating. That being said, it is also worth pointing out that a lot of shock jock radio was theater of the mind. And so you have situations where people act like they're fighting and they really aren't. And so in in the concept of theater of the mind, you have things like where a producer can say, hey, I'm talking on the radio too, which a lot of times producers are the main host of the show, and I'm playing a role, which is to say, maybe I don't really care about what I'm saying or even agree with what I'm saying, compared to I'm being serious, I'm actually emotional about what I'm talking about here, whether that's angry or upset. And then the highest level of danger there is we need to discuss this off air and probably drop the topic completely on air because that's really upset somebody. Whereas in most cases with theater of the mind, you're asking people to just go with the bit. That's your default neutral spot. Is basic improv concept. Always go with the bit. Always play along. But certainly it might be helpful when someone is going with the bit, that for somebody to say, hey, I'm playing it up a lot. I'm exaggerating quite a bit from what I actually believe or feel, and downright saying, hey, I'm actively saying the opposite of what I feel, which certainly in Shock Jock Radio you hear a lot of that too. And I'm using Shock Jock Radio as an example because, a cooking radio show, talk show, is highly unlikely to have major controversies and major problems. So that Shock Jock is where you're likely going to run into the issues. Under this, I started to think of a different category, maybe an inner ring here, as far as keep it light versus you're being too silly. The neutral would be this is a good mood, versus it's too serious or keep it serious, which some of those kind of overlap too, and you probably could break that down to just too serious, too silly, too serious, good mood, keep it light, keep it serious. Probably not adding anything as far as options to be said. And then I started with a first pass as far as here's some yes and like concepts in improv, which any content creator is going to probably benefit severely by knowing these concepts. I don't know if you really need to pay money and take improv classes. It probably wouldn't hurt, but also I think it's really important to remember that improv is not really that popular. As far as whose line is it anyways, it's about the only real successful improv, and most people that teach improv are kind of failures as far as finding any kind of other work that makes any money for them other than the fact that they're making money selling improv classes. Plus, improv gets taken too serious in my opinion and becomes its own thing, whereas for content creators, for stand-up comedians, for actors, for theater actors, improv slightly helpful, but not really super helpful. You don't want to go too down that road unless you really love improv. But remember, most people that go and listen to things don't like improv. There is no real improv YouTube content being created. And the biggest thing to remember is improv is really scripted too. It is systems and techniques being done over and over again. And if you watch enough Whose Line Is It Anyway, you definitely see that, where it's just the same techniques. Keywords may change, but it's just the same techniques over and over again. But yeah, like the top 10 concepts is what I found online and I kind of agree with this. You should know yes and it certainly would make sense to remind people to say, hey, yeah, do yes and, don't do no buts, which completely shut down an idea and introduce a different idea. Make your partner look good, great concept, always good. Listen carefully, great concept. Be in the moment, great concept. Don't play with your phone in the middle of a podcast. Don't block it. Again, that's like no buts. Don't block ideas. Now, in some cases, a lot of this that's on this concept of I guess it would be called a project. We'll call it a project for now. Might be a product at some point. There's a thought that it could be 3D printed or vinyl cut as a kit. But it's very low tech for me, certainly as a computer programmer, to make something like this. It's so low tech, but it's something that I think might very well fulfill a need. But yeah, a lot of times blocking ideas is somewhat of a good idea, but let the producer do that. Don't, as a guest or as just a host, block ideas. Which that's almost exactly the same thing as commit fully, take risks. Which in a lot of cases, maybe you don't want to take risks if you're doing an NPR thing. And that's why each of these concepts being modifiable or Velcro removable might be useful. Keep it simple, have fun, basic things. But then there's also the concept counter to that, depending on the type of content you're making, where you want people just to stay on script and not to add any ad-libbing at all. That is certainly also possibilities there. So, yeah. A lot of this also could have more inside baseball phrases like kayfabe, a bit, doing a bit, a shoot, or a work. Some of those wrestling phrases that Shock Jock Radios also use. I'm kind of going on my way to simplify the text and not have those phrases, because yes, if you know what a shoot or a work is, that makes sense, but honestly, most of your audience knows what a shoot or a work is if they are wrestling fans also, so it's not like you're really talking in code with any of that, and there's just a possibility that some of your guests may not know that, and so there's just really no reason to use extra jargon and extra lingo, although clearly some of this is very much, when I say I'm being serious, that's basically saying this is a shoot. I'm playing a bit, that's basically saying this is a work. Then I've also generalized several things that should just be on the back of the mind of any content creator, because careers, which I am pretty sure I misspelled careers there. Hey, I've also misspelled Ben. I was typing this on my phone very poorly. But careers have been lost for things. I say never forget here, evoking 9/11, which is really the reference here, that severely off-tone broadcasts have changed the focus of many radio shows. And when 9/11 2001 happened, there were a lot of radio show personalities who were silly and just having fun, that all of a sudden on that day were super serious and doing something very different. It didn't ruin too many people's careers, but it may have created a different feeling and a change of focus, and for a long time after 9/11, a lot of those shows struggled to make the similar kind of content that they made in the past, and may very well have never made the same level of content. So yeah, you have to be aware that that kind of change in focus, even if it was really necessary, may send you down a completely different direction. In a lot of ways, Howard Stern, probably that same thing, just over the years being older, getting on American Idol, things like that, just all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, over a long period of time, changed the focus, changed the tone of what Howard Stern radio was. Then I'm trying to make this more generic. You have the War of the Worlds controversy from many decades ago, where the War of the Worlds was audio broadcast on BBC Radio, and despite the fact that there was a mention that it was a dramatized presentation, that it was entertainment at the beginning, many people missed the beginning, many people just didn't comprehend that it was fake, and so much of War of the Worlds was played out like a regular news broadcaster, with regular news broadcasters doing the voices in War of the Worlds, to the point where people on the BBC during the time actually did seem to believe that aliens were invading. Although I wouldn't be surprised also if some of that controversy was played up by, say, the newspaper, who probably hated radio as a competitor. But yeah, people severely affected there. Probably a couple people lost their jobs on that scenario. It is perhaps a phrase, if fake news wasn't such a loaded phrase, you might call this fake news, but same thing. Certainly people have caused controversies by broadcasting completely fake news. Opie and Anthony doing a fake news segment saying a mayor of Chicago, I believe, was dead, getting fired for that, or suspended for that. That was a big controversy too. Famous very old guy got into a big controversy for payola, basically taking bribes. Segment, people advertising on the radio, giving away like a car or something, so that the radio station can do a giveaway, and then the car is won by a friend of the radio host, basically laundering money effectively, or straight up just people taking bribes to promote things on the radio. Payola, as its own phrase, is perhaps inside baseball. Definitely there have been controversies around selling snake oil products. Just here's some kind of herbal essence, essential oil thing that is not really going to do anything and promises to solve all kinds of health ailments, make you feel better or something like that. Just a general trash talk where either intentionally or unintentionally, because a microphone is hot, you'll have people talking inappropriately or rudely about people, and a lot of this could be labeled, if taken to an extreme, as cancel culture stuff, but also a lot of this is just things you should be aware have happened in the past and very likely will happen again, and you'll cancel yourself if you're trash talking people. Same on the too crazy talk, when you get into full-on tinfoil hat conspiracy talk. That's going to drastically change your career, if not eliminate it, to the point, I assume Alex Jones is a great example there, where his talk against that school shooting in Florida has led to him being sued and losing his entire radio station, which at a certain point, too crazy talk can very well fall into the legal grounds of slander. Certainly encouraging extreme fan activity has gotten people in trouble, whether that's encouraging people to, I don't know, drink 10 gallons of alcohol, or march in some kind of anti-government parade that turns into a riot or something like that. Like, certainly there's a lot of that. Go to people's houses, harass people. A lot of shock talk radios will make that mistake and say, hey, call this mayor's office and harass them. And it's just like, hey, these are things that are taking the fun and games and the fiction of what's being happening on your presentation, whether that's radio or YouTube. I imagine there's plenty of YouTube examples if I looked for them too. On-air events certainly have gotten people in trouble too, as far as having real drinking games, whereas most of the time, and the right way to do a drinking game, if you even do a drinking game at all, I'm not sure you really should encourage that, but most of the time the trick there is to have very little alcohol in the glasses, to severely water down what is being drunk, potentially to not drink any alcohol at all, and just have people play it up and pretend like they're drunk. Once you have people actually drinking alcohol, even a small amount, if you were doing, say, a power hour, which is one of the ones they often do, where it's a shot every minute, that's a massive amount of alcohol in a very short amount of time. But if you had it where you really were only drinking one shot of alcohol, say every 20 minutes or 30 minutes even, depending on the person, that still might lower their inhibitions to certainly a level where they would just stop following instructions and stop acting appropriate and just doing the opposite of every other thing on this list. So yeah, really in my mind the only way to do a drinking game is to 100% fake it and have it all be just water. But even in that, water drinking games evokes where a person literally died by being in a contest drinking as much water as possible and not peeing. They died of water poisoning, water intoxication. Then, speaking of contest giveaways where people were screwed over, there are also finally fake prize giveaways as a thought, such as win a Toyota, where people go through this contest and think that they're winning a Toyota automobile, and instead they walk out with a plastic toy Yoda doll, which literally a YouTuber did that again, the exact same gimmick, just a few weeks ago. So it's not like people are learning from this, and I'm pretty sure that the radio station that originally did win the Toyota was sued for false advertising and probably did end up having to give a Toyota car to the winner. But yeah, that is just another thing you don't want to really do. And frankly, prize giveaways are legally dubious. You really have to look into the laws and know how you do it. Prize giveaways, as far as just raffles and things, very possibly not even legal in places like Canada. You definitely have a case where you have to put in a lot of legalese to say, hey, it's only going to be in the United States or in this one country. Otherwise, foreign laws may very well affect you. And in general, as a concept, as I wrap up here, since this is a fairly boring wall of text that clearly is just the first pass, and I maybe will think of some new ideas, but I also just need to organize things. Also trying to make this look right visually, which it's nowhere close to that there. But giveaways in general are not the greatest of concepts, because you're creating potentially hundreds, thousands, maybe tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of losers for, at best, maybe 100 winners if you're doing a really big giveaway and you had like third tier prizes. Even if you were doing a giveaway where everybody's a winner and it's a really low coupon that you win for the vast majority of people, and then one person wins one big prize, it's still really going to upset more people than it encourages. And it is definitely the kind of thinking that comes from an old school way of doing advertising to just evoke the gamblers. It is worth pointing out that a lot of talk radio, and a lot of radio in particular, only existed because it didn't have competition like YouTube in the past, and only really even succeeded pre-YouTube because there was a lot of people just listening to the radio while they were doing their job, a lot of secretaries with the radio in the background, and that was kind of it. And a lot of radio succeeds in just in the same way that a lot of local TV succeeds, by having local companies willing to spend way more money than they should on advertising in those aspects, where that advertising money is more than likely being flushed down the toilet and not leading to actual more sales. So yeah, those are the concepts of a first pass of a Eat the Mic project, as far as putting these phrases in rings, in a circular ring or little pie slices possibly, which is going to be difficult certainly to get all the sizing and shaping there. And using Google Sheets to do that is probably not the right move. Really, I should make it a STL style 3D printer file where you could adjust the things there, but that's asking too much, at least for this first thought. This really, like all the projects that I start, needs to be something I finish fairly quickly. Otherwise, I'm going to burn out and only get 90% of the way there. But yeah, those are the concepts and the thoughts I have right now. And it's a good start, certainly, for something that I probably have only spent a couple hours actually doing anything with, versus spending several other hours thinking about it. And I do think this is helpful as a concept. First of all, because like the physical idea of putting it on the back of a prize wheel is great. It gives you a good excuse to have a prize wheel, and does give you a good excuse to then use the prize wheel in some way. Steal that idea from good mythical lore. Certainly, in prize wheels, you can get a small one on Amazon very cheaply. You might have to pay a little bit if you want a custom one, or if you want a really big one, but a small one that can just sit on the desk is more than likely what all you would ever need. And they definitely are phrases. Like, inherently a producer is going to be a kind of controlling person, and has to be kind of a controlling person, and so if he has to say all of that out loud, or if he's whispering all of that into the ears or the headphones of people, it's going to come off as controlling, and you may get some negative pushback either from the presenters and the guests, or even the audience, if the audience hears it. So yeah, this is the reason why in most careers you have a boss who has an office, who has a door that can close, that's quiet, is because in most cases a boss is going to be more of a bossy, controlling person and be telling individual people what to do. When you're producing content, it's not like that. Most talk shows, you might have somebody in a booth that is somewhat isolated, but a lot of the SiriusXM people have gotten down to the point where you have the producer and everybody that works on the team is in the same room, and you will have the host straight up ask the producer something and bring them into the conversation while they have a little desk in a corner producing the show too. The SiriusXM in particular have given double duty for a lot of employees and made them more celebrities than they probably should have been. Now, I'm not going to talk about this too much, but apparently GodotCon Boston is happening May 5th through 7th. I was scrolling down Twitter/X for the first time in a long time and saw this, and this is probably a good example of something that I'm not getting as far as news. Joining them on Discord is probably a great way to avoid using Twitter in the future. But yeah, there is going to be effectively, it doesn't feel like Boston. Oh yeah, that is Boston. A convention where people go and talk about Godot. Godot projects in particular. Seems like there's no particular skill level in their occupation that they're looking for. So yeah, they're trying to do their own thing here. Which, yeah, points to the idea of Godot becoming more viable as as a live source. I mean, not live source, as a open source game engine. The live stream is not going to be live streamed, but talks will be recorded and uploaded to the Godot engine YouTube channel, so those might be what you would mostly want to watch if you're just slightly interested and don't want to meet people or just feel like you haven't even learned the Godot engine well enough. First day is going to be workshops, and apparently there's going to be one in Europe too if you can't make it to Boston. Seems like tickets also have to be bought, so it doesn't seem like it's going to be a free thing, which isn't super surprising. Now, as someone who's only played around with Godot, I definitely wouldn't consider myself to be somebody who would be the right person to go to GodotCon. I suppose as a content creator, it might be interesting to cover it as a news source, and that might make some justification if I had the finances to really justify doing that. But yeah, I'm not sure that they even really want content creators to go there and try to create their own content. So it might very well be a situation where you would go and you would sit through a bunch of presentations and then talk about it later. And yeah, I would also say that if you're a kid that's learning Godot, it's probably not going to be for you. Like, particularly as Godot is fairly new as an engine, it's probably going to be more adult type people talking about more complicated type things. And certainly I'd hope that there would be some discussions to expand the Godot engine's capabilities and tutorials even further. It is still fairly difficult, I think, and just kind of a lack of focus to make a Godot game that isn't either a 2D or 3D platformer style game. When you start to get into things that might have UIs, when you start to think of things like Belairtro, card games, solitaire games, hidden object games, point and click adventures, all of those get far enough from the standard as far as what Godot has been used so far to make that there's not as much real support there. Although I'm not sure it even really benefits Godot if all of a sudden it became the default engine that hidden object games and asset flip games started to be made in. Although actually, now that I say that out loud, it probably does benefit Godot, because if somebody is making a kind of low effort hidden object game in Godot, there's a small chance that that person might learn Godot enough to be more ambitious in their next project, if they actually would do that. Whereas the counter example is if somebody is making a hidden object games using a hidden object game engine that can only make hidden object games, well, then you are just investing more and more time learning nothing new and not being able to translate what you're learning to a different type of game. RPG Maker is kind of the prime example of that, is that if you're making a game with RPG Maker, you're learning an engine that literally really can only make RPGs. And the very similar looking 8-bit RPGs that if you wanted to be more ambitious, you just aren't going to have that opportunity to translate what you've learned. And yeah, I don't know what you would really call that, but I'd maybe call it like dead stock knowledge, as you've learned something, but it is a dead end to learning anything new or make it work. I played this Star Trek Lower Deck, the Badgie Directive, for a while. Not really a good game, unfortunately, which is a shame, because it really should have been more of a promotional tool for lower decks. Actually, today, once we get into the video game news, is not going to be that long, because we covered a lot of news on Saturday. We're effectively one day short. Plus, it is President's Day in the United States and over the weekend, which means less news in general. So yeah, I guess I do, now that I've thought about it, would prefer just everybody move to the Godot engine, even the low effort asset flip developers. Maybe clearly I would have to assume, just as a way of maintaining society and having hope in society and maintaining my sanity, I would have to assume that some percentage, at least a few of the low effort asset flippers, as I call them, that release games on Steam, actually do have something to contribute and might learn something new and might actually try. So there might very well be a feedback to it. It might get to the point where there's just a Godot plugin to make hidden object games, and so those people who are making hidden object games may use that plugin and not really contribute anything else, but still it would get Godot's name out there and just increase the stats as far as how many things are using Godot. Now, Godot is an open source engine, so there is, as I understand it, no license fee there at all. I don't even think you have to show the logo at the beginning of the game launching. It's also worth pointing out that I guess it's worth pointing out that a few days ago, YouTube's anniversary went by. It was actually founded on Valentine's Day. Originally, I think the thought was for it to be a dating app site. I'm not sure it ever really got to that point where it actually was being used as a dating app site, but the idea was you were going to upload videos to introduce yourself for dating reasons. This would have been pre-acquisition from Google too. YouTube would have been founded. Which, yeah, I do hear that YouTube was a fairly different thing before Google acquired it. It's a shame that I didn't get on the bandwagon day one. Anyone who did get in the bandwagon on anything like that on day one would have had some pretty decent level of success. Although the vast majority of people who were there since day one at YouTube probably aren't making content anymore, and even if they are, they probably aren't anywhere as successful as they once were. And the game has changed. In fact, the game is changing even more, in that YouTube is now introducing ways to straight up just put AI generated content with really no artistic contribution at all as a YouTube short. They are just asking you to play with an AI image generator, type in a prompt, and put that prompt created video on as a short, which YouTube shorts are already very low quality and low effort, mine being no exception in that case. But it is certainly crazy to think it's only going to get worse now. I think I'll briefly show my chart here, the slow moving over the year chart of games that people are playing, which, yeah, definitely needs to be reduced. Even if I reduced it to 6 months instead of 12 months, that still might be just too slow moving of a chart for it to matter. And then when big changes happen, when the next GTA comes out, even if it is just like in the #1 spot for months and months and months, it still won't change on this chart fast enough. I guess otherwise, I will also throw out there that I've caught up on High Potential, the English version of High Intellectual Potential. They pivoted after about 6 or 7 episodes. They started making murder stories and murder mysteries that, as far as I can tell, none of which are really even inspired by the episodes of the French show. So you do have this situation now where if you're an English speaker watching High Potential in the first season first kind of works, and then you'll just have a little bit of overlap when you go, if you went and watched the French one. And by the time, if you watched the first season of the English version, then you go and watch the original has like 3 or 4 seasons, and you probably won't even remember that the first episodes are the same as the English one. So it does go in this whole split. And it definitely feels like the English version has totally split from the original characterizations of the original French characters. The French characters, like, perhaps this is fairly common in French shows, they're more silly and willing to be more goofy, where the Hollywood actors in the English one just refuse to be goofy and silly. They all have to have this cool factor. They all have to have this seriousness factor. And yeah, you're losing a lot of personality here because of that. There's a goofy second lieutenant, effectively, in the French one that's kind of a pushover, and he is turned into a super serious character, and as such is kind of given no character throughout the English season. There's a kind of quirky, crazy hacker girl in the French show who basically just turns into your computer lady and has very little personality. The boss in the French show is supposed to be this overwhelmed, kind of quirky character. Instead, she is just a generic always cool and calm and in charge boss in the English one. Most of the total personality of the main protagonist is watered down to make her cooler, and a mother who struggles a little bit to raise her kids but really doesn't, and in a lot of ways is much more of a perfect mother and not really struggling with having HIP and not really gross or crazy in any way, way too serious, and so all of that comedy falls away. And a lot of the will they won't they between the main female protagonist and the main lieutenant guy, who may not actually be a lieutenant, main detective guy, completely missing in the English one. And the main detective guy's OCD and cleanliness and germophobia is completely missing in the English one. So it is a really good example to watch the French one, potentially watch that first, and get to really know the personality and the characterization of these characters, and see how Hollywood just strips all of that. And I don't know if that's really Hollywood writers and producers or just notes from executive producers that does it, or if it isn't straight up a case where the actors themselves all want to be in cool presentation at all time, and they're just not willing to make themselves or even the characters they play look goofy or silly. It's a real death of the idea of having a little bit of comedy in a show, and where American shows just all want to be dramas. It kind of sucks that you can't have more diversity of thought there. I'm probably not sticking with Luther, because that show is not what I thought it was, and not really interesting me as far as a murder mystery show. I'm not that big of a murder mystery fan. Watched Severance. Severance is moving very fast and probably wisely going to wrap itself up after a second or third season, but may also just get dragged out and become worse and worse. There is a danger, I think, with Severance that it's just going to get weirder and weirder and not ever really explain anything, or it's going to just be a basic boring explanation that the people who think they are outside the Audis are actually severed too, and that there is just a real world or virtual reality simulation happening, and the severed people are just the same. Which that would be the most boring and generic revelation, is that, oh surprise, when the severed people or the Audis go to sleep, they actually all wake up in a real world, and none of it's real, or none of it's real in the first place, and none of the people exist in the first place, and it's just some big virtual reality simulation. You needed, I think, more contrast where the outside world felt normal and the inside world felt weird, and that's just not what's happening. They're just going weird in every direction. Yeah, I feel like I watched something else, but if I can't even remember it, it's probably not worth mentioning. Yeah. Clearly, I'm still getting a lot of... Oh, I wasn't expecting a anniversary bundle for Marvel Rivals. Although this, for the Fantastic Four, the animation style of... I assume this is Sue Storr and this is Mr. Fantastic. It still just feels so off that I don't even really recognize who these people are. Yes, it's Mr. Fantastic and the Invisible Woman. Yeah, that art style, I think, is really off. But clearly the gameplay is still pretty popular. And it does seem like this might be a very good way to feed into the Fantastic Four movie and get people hyped around the Fantastic Four who are not comic book fans, if people are still playing this by the time movie actually comes out. But the fact that they've just made the character so big, look at how tiny her hand is, because the female character model is so small compared to how giant Mr. Fantastic's hand is. You can make an argument maybe he stretched his hand to be bigger, in the same way that his chest maybe is stretched out to be bigger, but that's just how they animate all the characters. Here you have an example of what a character more traditionally would be animated as. Here you have an example of a really ridiculously over-exaggerated muscular male character. And just look at the size of his head compared to his shoulders and chest and things. It's just really off. Look at the size of his hands compared to his head. His hands are bigger than his head is. And yeah, you can see Captain America, similar build, maybe a little bit scrawnier for Spider-Man, and very similar build for Venom. I did watch Captain Sparkles. Clearly I'm sitting around watching more TV than I really should be. Play a smaller indie game, I think it's called Let's Dig a Hole, and it seemed like it was a twist on a 3D version on Minecraft, and at some level it kind of is, but then it kind of maxes out and you get, I skipped to the end, didn't watch all of his live stream. You get to the end and the game just kind of ends, and then you can play the second game. Apparently it was like a game jam game where you would expect it to just be a procedurally generating thing that would just go on forever, where you're digging this hole in your backyard and you just continuously dig. But yeah, I think that might be kind of a good example of the problem with game jam games, is that game jams have this level of prestige they try to apply to themselves, whether they actually deserve it or not, when in reality most game jam games are low effort games inherently, just because of the amount of time you have. Making a game in 48 hours is in no way equivalent or a good way to make a game. Let's look at that one. It at best is going to let you experiment with one concept or one idea, but even in that, you're not really experimenting well with one concept or idea. All you're really doing is making relationships. And if that's the goal of game jams, which it probably is to make relationships, why not just make relationships and work on projects for a longer period of time? Why not have it be that we've announced the game jam, you can start working with your groups of friends, we'll help you meet with random people and form a group and work together to be a telecommuting on a project. Wouldn't that just make a lot more sense? And then when the actual event happens and the actual game jam happens where everybody comes together, that's where you would have something to really show other people. In a lot of ways, it might make more sense to say game jams should be where people come and show off their early prototypes of their games that they're working on as a sellable product. Because right now, the way game jams are done, none of those game jam games are ever really sellable products, or very few of them are. So it does just feel like it's people wasting their time. Yeah. In any other long project-based thing, it would make fairly no sense at all. If you had, like, Michelangelo painting paintings by going to painting jams, where for 48 hours you're assigned in a random group, or you just pick a random group of people and they all work together to paint something like the Mona Lisa. Well, you're not going to get anything like the Mona Lisa in that case. That, at best, the equivalent there would be if Michelangelo went to a painting class and painted something for just an hour or something. Which in those cases, painting classes generally expect you to take that first hour's worth of work and evolve it if you want to, or abandon it. They don't expect you to have anything to actually show after an hour's worth of work or a couple hours worth of work. And in painting classes, you're not going to work with other people likely in a collaborative way. So it does seem like Legend of Heroes Trails Through Dawnbreak 2 is very positively reviewed. So I can go ahead and put that on the wish list, which that's what I wanted to check. Do we have any refurb Steam Decks today? No. I do think it is helpful to see how frequently refurbs are not available. Pretty much it does feel like whenever I miss or see a Slick Deals listing for Steam Decks being refurbed, that seems to be about the only time they actually have any in stock. Which, it's worth mentioning and remembering that GameStop also is selling refurbs, so I would imagine the vast majority of the refurbs are being sent to GameStop's first and foremost, and then anything GameStop employees can't refurb is getting sent to Valve. The lack of refurbs also perhaps speaks to the durability of a Steam Deck, and that they're not just being thrown around and broken. Also, it may speak to just the reality that not that many Steam Decks are out there in the wild. What didn't happen this year is we didn't have major Christmas sales of Steam Decks happening. Whereas that certainly could have been a thing. It did occur to me, and it's occurring to me now, that there's room for even more improvement there, that since all the Steam sales have been posted, that there isn't a good argument to highlight and just every time I stream mention when the next sale is happening. So every stream gives that little bit of reminder as far as, hey, don't buy anything right now because the next sale is happening here. And if we have the entire year's lineup of sales showing off that lineup, makes a lot of sense. Oh yeah, I also remember now what I was going to mention. I watched all of season 1 of School Spirits, which is apparently a Paramount Plus show, but season 1's available on Amazon Prime Video at the moment. Probably to tease for season 2 that you can't watch. It's a alright show. Kind of murder mystery meets ghosts in high school. Although it does suffer from a major flaw that I don't care how big your high school is or how long it's been, there is no way that you would have as many people die on campus as there are ghosts on that school without that school being shut down. There's just not a period long enough between the tragedies that you wouldn't shut down the school and school can't be that long because the facilities usually are very poorly maintained. In fact, in School Spirits, they have like a bomb fallout shelter in the basement, and that's just like, yeah, that means this whole building is really, really old. Probably has asbestos in the walls. You would stop funding the maintenance of that school and form a new school, build a new school eventually. You get the funding for that and do that. But yeah, in particular, when a bus flips in School Spirits, apparently in the past a bus flipped and caused several band members, like 6 or 7, to die at once. That one tragedy almost certainly would have shut down the school. When it's multiple people, you could probably keep accidental deaths quiet and have 1 or 2 accidental deaths happen in a school in a lot of ways. Somebody just dying of an allergy or football accident or something. It's not that crazy, but it is too many, like particularly when you're adding 6 band members. Let's see how many really were there. I would say there's probably about 14 ghosts at, no, probably 15 at minimum. Yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised if they introduced even more in the school. And yeah, that's just too much. Once you're over 10, newspapers are going to start writing stories, and the rumors are going to pass. Parents are going to let slip that somebody died at that school when they were going there. The thought of it being haunted alone is going to cause the building to be shut down. Most schools that most people in the United States went to will not have even a single known death on the campus, whereas realistically probably are 2 or 3 people who died, depending on how big the school is and how long it's been running. But also, you can dismiss a lot of deaths if somebody trips and falls and hits their head, or if there's a fight. If it's not something that's really the school's fault, people won't think about it that much. But bus rolling over in particular is going to stick out. Anyways, so I have rambled way too much today. Just to kind of warm up. I did think I started at about the best time that I could consistently start at today, which is still, frankly, too late in the evening. It's a shame that the algorithm still promotes live streaming. Otherwise, I would just pre-record all of this footage a day before and then have it scheduled, and I could be way more consistent in that way. These days, nobody is getting in the chat and saying anything, and I'm frankly just not skilled enough to chat back and talk to people while playing games or even covering video game news. So the chat aspects of being live and the idea of being live in general has really degraded on YouTube, in my opinion, to the point where if it weren't the algorithm promoting it, I wouldn't do live presentations. But unfortunately, it still does get promoted more. Yep. And I guess that's all I have to really say about that. So let's go through the Video Games Chronicle news, which again, one day shorter. Some of this we may have already talked about, and there'll be just less news overall. Sony is reportedly not going to hold, they might not hold a full summer showcase this year. We kind of already talked about this. In fact, this may very well be the exact same article, just opened the second time from Video Game Chronicle. Phil Spencer provides rare update on the missing in action Xbox exclusive Everwild. Microsoft game boss says Rare is making progress 3 years after the last reveal. Which, yeah, I'm sure CEOs don't like it when people ask them questions about things that they'd prefer to just secretly go away, and or that they'd prefer to secretly continue funding without having shareholders ask questions. In general, I would think that bosses don't like questions in general, but excuse me. Sorry. So all I can take from that is it does seem like Phil Spencer wants to support Rare at the moment. It does seem more like a case that Microsoft's MO, method of operating, is to let companies continue to churn and work on games until they are finally forced to actually release a game. And then once the game fails miserably, then they start to shut down things. And so I wouldn't be surprised if over the course of the next couple of years, you'll see companies like Rare, maybe Double Fine, maybe some Blizzard teams, maybe some Activision teams, all being allowed to put out games, and then those games just kind of fail miserably, and then there are layoffs after the fact in that case. Which that isn't really the worst way or that non-standard way of doing business. It's much worse, I think, because it then all falls on Phil Spencer's head if he were to cancel something like Everwild before gamers even saw it. It's way easier to say, well, the gamers rejected this game and it didn't sell well because it's the gamers' fault, than it is to say Phil Spencer rejected this game and just cut it mid-production. And Rare still has a name to it, so Phil Spencer probably desperately wants Rare to make good games and be known for making good games, although it's always questionable on these company names how many people who worked at Rare when they were making Banjo-Kazooie still work at Rare. I wouldn't be surprised if close to nobody at Rare, now owned by Microsoft, worked on things like Banjo-Kazooie, which is something I think Rare did work on in the past. Yeah, and I guess we'll leave it at that. Phil Spencer probably asked several questions, so we'll probably have a couple of headlines here. The quote here is, "I'm not trying to move them all over to Xbox anymore." Phil Spencer explains Xbox's PS5 release strategy. CEO says he still prefers to sell games on Xbox but won't ignore other user bases. Which, okay. That makes a lot of sense. It's something that's a statement that's going to make gamers, console gamers, generally happy. It also is just admitting reality that the Xbox Series X is at rock bottom hardware sales numbers and is just not selling well anywhere in the world, whereas PS5 is selling better than that, considerably better than that. And we still, even with the Switch 2 coming out, there's really no belief that the Switch 2 is going to be so good that it replaces the desire to own a PlayStation or an Xbox as far as a higher quality console device. It is much more realistic that a Steam machine came out to replace consoles than it would be to trust Nintendo to come out with something to replace the high-end consoles. Let's see, GTA 6's PC release date is early 2026, Corsair believes. Really, Take-Two has only hinted at a PC release after consoles. Yeah, and I guess at this point, it is an interesting question as far as looking at the screenshot where we are in the world. is this not YouTube family friendly? It's probably family friendly enough. Two-piece bikinis, fine by me. But I don't know. There definitely are areas and regions and people who have always been really conservative, although those are not people that would have bought GTA 6 in the first place. But then governments and censor boards might be becoming more conservative. Although I would think it would be hard to say this is something that needs to be censored. It is just a glamour shot of a lady who naturally has female presenting parts. I assume she's a lady. In a two-piece bikini, which is not an unrealistic two-piece bikini to see on any beach. Moving on, Hideki Kamiya says the reaction to his Game Awards reveal made him cry. So yeah, the emotional reaction to Okami 2's reveal. Okay. It's good to know. It is perhaps a Japanese to English translation issue there, but also it might be just that he's emotional. I would assume it was cry with joy, not, which that is kind of the problem in text. If you say it made him cry, some people could read that as crying with anguish as much as someone would read it with crying with joy. It's a good statement, certainly, to play the fans and increase fandom love for your project. Whereas there is certainly a danger in many game developers of being jerks or not being gracious and putting out the wrong message and pissing off the audience before your game even gets released. So yeah, at a certain point also, though, I would also argue that this is not news. It is a nice little thing you might see as a response on Twitter, but it's not really newsworthy to say somebody is appreciative without having any new facts or reveals to talk about. So yeah, that kind of feels like a slow news day. Nintendo Switch Marvel Rival devs are open to report. NetEase producer confirms that they have switched to dev kits. One would generally assume that if they can get Marvel Rivals to run on the Switch 2, which they should be able to do that, it will be on the Switch 2. It's an interesting question if Marvel Rivals becomes a system seller for the Switch 2, because of it being a live service game. But yeah, that would be intriguing, and it would probably be a statement that Nintendo is launching with a lackluster lineup on the Switch 2, which they very well might launch with a lackluster lineup, and you might see third-party developers pulling in slack and convincing more Switch gamers to go to Switch 2 because of third-party games instead of first-party games. It's worth pointing out, though, that I still, if you want to be a content creator, which what kid doesn't these days, I can't really recommend the Switch. Playing Nintendo games that you can't really stream as much without getting Content ID claimed. Going through the extra effort of owning a Switch 2 and then having some kind of capture card to capture the video of the Switch 2 is just extra money. That's probably not worth it. Meanwhile, in particular, if you are just a huge fan of Marvel Rivals, you can play that on PC. I think you can play it even on a Steam Deck. So, where it would be no need at that point to really have a capture card, if you're playing on PC at least. So yeah, I'd say keep that in mind, at least a little. Let's see, Game Pass. Phil Spencer says Xbox isn't trying to funnel players away from game ownership. I would argue the Game Pass inherently was always designed and is always going to be trying to funnel players away from game ownership. Perhaps funnel is the word he is disputing there, saying that he's just giving options to a different type of player. The option is not particularly great. You have no real high chance of long-term game ownership through Game Pass. You're paying a monthly fee to own some sort of games. The lineup of games you're getting these days is probably worse quality than what you would have gotten in the past. And Microsoft itself is just not lined up to release a whole bunch of first-party title games that would justify the price of Game Pass. But this really is Phil Spencer just reiterating what he's been saying for a couple months now, is that gamers should be able to play the games wherever they want to, although inherently they are not including Steam in that statement as much, because if the reality of the case was, then since the vast majority of PC gamers play games on Steam, you would see Xbox abandon the Microsoft Store concept as a competitor to Steam, because basically nobody wants to play PC games via the Microsoft Store. Let's see. It looks like Elden Ring Night Rain DLC will include bosses and playable characters. Is that supposed to be as playable characters? Or is there something about the Night Rain DLC that I don't understand? Elden Ring Night Rain will see bosses from across the Souls series return and include new bosses exclusive to Night Rain. But now it seems that they're planning on to bring additional bosses and playable characters to the game. Well, in a funny way, if the Night Rain DLC were to bring all of the interesting bosses from previous Souls games, that does potentially let them not have to remaster and support some of the older Souls games, and instead just tell everybody to play Night Rain as DLC. Although, since it's DLC to Elden Ring, you would think it might play a little bit differently and control a little differently, and it still pins you into this purchase of buying the base Elden Ring game first and foremost. I'm not 100% sure though that Souls fans would be okay with just re-battling bosses, particularly if the land masses and areas are different compared to something like Dark Souls or Demon Souls, which the land masses almost certainly are different. So in a lot of ways this DLC may be for people who want something a little bit different but then are a little nostalgic for the bosses. But I don't think it actually would be a full replacement for the previous games, which still is going to have people calling for remasters and remakes to be made of the previous Souls games and Bloodborne too. Moving on, a influential Dishonored and Half-Life 2 artist, Viktor Antonov, has died. He was a veteran, worked on Half-Life and Dishonored franchise. I assume this is him. This is a pretty decent picture, although it is seemingly more of an action shot than you would expect for what is basically an obituary notice. I'd assume this is around Dishonored 1. It is, I imagine, a shame that we're getting to the point where people who worked on Half-Life and Half-Life 2 are more likely to die than be mentioned because of a Half-Life 3 or even a Dishonored 3. But yeah, it seems like more and more this is going to happen. And there definitely were some aspects of Dishonored 1 as far as its art style that I liked, but I could also see if you were to make a Dishonored 3, you would smooth out the visuals quite a bit. Let's see, he was born in Bulgaria. He moved to Paris when he was 17. He worked first on Redneck Rampage. He joined Valve in the early 2000s, serving as art director on Half-Life 2, which at the time Half-Life 2's art was probably pretty good. It's kind of hard to look back now. Yeah, this whole Twitter statement here. Let's see. Following his time at Valve, he was a visual director on Dishonored and the game's DLC. He then served as an additional art director on Wolfenstein: The New Order. So clearly fairly influential. It is also probably the biggest shame here is that he won't be involved in a potential third Wolfenstein game, which unfortunately we probably won't ever see that trilogy actually wrap up. Following that, he also worked at Bethesda Game Studios, working as a consultant on Fallout 4, Dishonored 2, Doom, and Prey, being more of a consultant in those roles. Interesting. So maybe you could speculate there that he might have been less capable, less active for a while. You never really get told why people die. They always keep that private. But yeah, that is a shame, and I guess that's all you really can say there. So let's move on. Apparently last week's PS5 State of Play was the most concurrent viewers ever. It's being claimed with more than 200 million players were watching the latest presentation at one point. I wonder if some of that isn't just straight up broadcast technology becoming easier too. Whereas less people likely to stream in the past years, or less capability to stream to such large audiences. That being said, I didn't watch the State of Play, and the news that came out of it was not particularly super interesting to me. It seemed like they talked about several games, but I think they were so diverse that they struggled to find people in general being interested. Here at this intro trailer, which is all I'm really going to watch here, you can see that there seems like there's a heavy influence on Monster Hunter Wilds, I think is what this game is, and JRPG type stuff in general, which that will attract that audience, and basically only that audience. There's a thought in my head, certainly, is just how long does it really take to take down a monster, or how variable is that time? Because yeah, I could see a lot of collaborations, crossovers of content creators saying, hey, let's go hunt this one monster. It's only going to take a few minutes to maybe an hour to hunt. and then you could move on to the next monster. And smaller packaging of more repetitive content certainly can appeal to a certain type of gamer, whereas things like Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel went way too far in the other direction. Also, I want to complain about Memento Mori a little bit. I've had nothing really negative to say about it, but I have to admit that the daily quests happening right about 2 o'clock every day is such an interruption. Like, I really wish the daily quest would happen closer to, say, 11 in the morning in my time zone, and just another one at about 11 in the evening. They do have 2 daily quest boosted times. You can ignore the boosted times and you just get less rewards from that, but I want to get as much rewards as possible. Well, I was expecting the state of play to actually show a collaboration collection of stuff at the front, and it doesn't have that. So if you really wanted to see even a small teaser of everything, you would have to watch somebody else's content, I guess. Unless there was just something right at the end here. This game is supposed to be an evolution of Returnal, and I didn't even get that concept. I was thinking maybe at the end here there would have been a collection of trailers and teasers, but nope. Yeah, so we'd already talked about all the games from the state of play, and it didn't really lead to anything that interesting to me. But I certainly could see why the number of concurrent viewers would have been high, because Sony has, in the previous months, kind of done a poor job of announcing anything else. So I could see how the desire for new announcements would be high. That being said, I can't help but wonder if there were several games that they would have liked to see some new announcements for that they didn't see new announcements for. Clearly, here you're not getting any kind of Last of Us or Spider-Man or God of War announcements, Astrobot announcements, as far as anything like that. New games from Sony as a first party not really being announced. Definitely some games in general that are just in development hell, like Beyond Good and Evil 2, that would have been interesting if there was a new announcement there. The new Kingdom Hearts game, having more of a teaser trailer, would have been interesting there. I imagine there's a really long list one could make of games that are in development hell, and it would be surprising if they actually came out of development hell and had new footage to show us. Moving on. We have a quote here: "It hasn't evolved as much as it should have. Overwatch 2 director says Marvel Rivals adds pressure to improve. This is no longer about playing it safe," says the Overwatch 2 lead. So they are coming out and saying that they definitely are feeling pressure and from Marvel Rivals, and perhaps they are just laying down the paving stones to admit defeat that Overwatch 2 has failed. And they are in a very probably better position now, where they could fail and blame the Activision Blizzard merger and acquisition by Microsoft. Not really a merger. It never is. So the last remaining people working on Overwatch 2 could just possibly skate by and let Overwatch 2 fail. Microsoft may not really care as much, or Microsoft may care and allow them to do something different, perhaps making Overwatch 2 feel a lot more like Overwatch 1, which would be what I would do, certainly, at least some of the time, is I would bring back all of the skins and all of the maps from Overwatch 1 into Overwatch 2 and say, hey, the entire game, basically untouched, of Overwatch 1 is now available to play. Maybe that splits your player base, but it's something certainly to think about. Maybe you have certain events where you bring back the maps from Overwatch 1. Meanwhile, in the background, you also work on evolving Overwatch 2 to be something more interesting. But also, I could see an argument to just give up, because there's just no way you're going to have anywhere as interesting of characters as the Marvel lineup in Overwatch 2. And they've already kind of failed to make any of the characters interesting in Overwatch 2. You could do some basic things like get them out of the dumb armor and make them look more like humans, showing more skin, and that would help a little bit. But you still would need a ton of more characters. I mean, just look at this concept art of the number of characters here. It's 2 or 3 times as many characters than what it really should have been, what Overwatch 2 would have had. Moving on, Stalker 2's second major patch is here with more than 1,700 fixes and improvements. Okay. Fix all aspects of the game. It's a shame that any game can be released and needs 1,700 patches and improvements, but it is nice that they did actually fix them. Although inherently 1,700 fixes as a number could be done more recurrently, in such that if you fix one thing, if you say did a search and replace in your code and it is the same function is repeated and copied 100 times, then you would have potentially 100 fixes. Although if your same code is repeated 100 times, then you're writing code very poorly and not using functions at all. So one would assume that that's not the case for any game that actually runs, so it probably is 1,700 different fixes. Although there might be fixes that are in similar concepts. Of course, I have no interest in spending time doing a deep dive around 1,700 fixes on the game. And that does bring an interesting point, that if you were a game developer, would you ever even spend the time to look at somebody else's code to that level and look up 1,700 fixes? I don't think you would. I think that would just be a huge waste of time. Alright, and unfortunately I'm going to have to take a short bathroom break. So I'll pause the recording and be right back. Okay, I'm back. It is a shame that it is just this kind of circular problem, in that these live streams go so long. I need to drink water, and because I'm drinking water and because I'm generally just unhealthy, I end up having to take bathroom breaks. Inherently, I could sneak off if I had a second presenter. But yeah, if that ever happened. I'm not sure collabs or me working with other content creators is ever going to go really too far. Yeah. And as far as like that whole meetup that I went to, like they only have like one every 2 months, so yeah, even if I go to all of them, I don't know how many people I'm gonna end up actually dealing with, or how much they really want to deal with me or not. Inherently, I have this personal situation where I have a lot more free time than most, and while that could change, it still wouldn't really change the fact that I am probably a little older, and I don't know how you say this, have a lot more thoughts, and am just bloviated in what I say and talk a lot more than most people are used to. So I think people easily can get overwhelmed, and frankly, people just have a really small tolerance on whether they even want to meet new people, to deal with new people at all. And I think a lot of people don't. But even if they do want to deal with new people, they have to basically be dealt with basically with kids' gloves, severely reducing it. I basically talk too fast is the equivalent of what I do. Like, and literally I might talk too fast for some people, but yeah, people just don't move at my mental speed or talk at my talking speed as much as I think as I would like, is I guess the phrase to use there. Yep. Which is basically to say nothing. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if I'm gonna have to just go to other kinds of meetups that aren't even video game related to try and burn through people and see who really wants to interact and who really doesn't. And I might burn through all of them. I might burn through every meetup and every person and either end up irritating people or just not really finding any real connection there. Yeah. I guess the best advice I could say is, if you're young, if you're still being forced to have friendships in school, in college, or through your work environment, you have some coworkers that you potentially are going to actually be friends with, which is a very risky proposition, because your coworkers could easily stab you in the back for no good reason. If you have those situations, form those relationships and try and maintain them as much as possible. That's the idea of what like Facebook originally was for. At this point, Facebook is pretty much useless in that aspect. Facebook at some point stopped even suggesting memories to rehash the same memories and repost the same memories, which that's mostly what I was using Facebook for. Is I was just putting a bunch of memes on my personal Facebook page and then reposting the same memes a year later, or at least looking at them to remind myself of what dumb meme I posted. But actual conversations on Facebook have pretty much disappeared for me, and mostly it's just a bunch of ads and bots, lots and lots of bots trying to get you to watch videos and move into content that your average person could create, non-typed text-based content in favor of Instagram photos and videos and things like that. And that's kind of true for, I think, all social medias at this point, is that the social aspect of social media has been completely eliminated and removed. At a certain point, there is just an argument to going outside and touching grass. Although, if you literally did that, you're not going to likely run into too many people. It is, I guess, somewhat nice to bring this back to video games, though, that if you are mainlining a game, like Rainbow Six Siege, for instance. If this game was a mainline game that people were playing, they tend still to have some kind of friend capabilities where you might be able to global chat and actually have a decent conversation. You're not likely to. I mean, it's going to be 1,000,000 to 1 that you have a decent conversation in most games. And even in those cases that you do have friend capabilities, it's usually people you've already made friends with. For instance, I've had friend me on Steam at the very bottom of my description on every single video I've made. Maybe over the course of 10 years, 2 or 3 people have sent me friend requests on Steam. Yeah, which Steam's friend system is not used that much, I know, but yeah, definitely goes to show you that it's not much of a system. And even if people did friend me on Steam, which people are more than welcome to, I'll accept basically anybody. There's highly unlikely going to be the same game being played by me, since I mostly play single player games when I am playing games, if I ever get back to playing games. Anyways, let's jump back into this, otherwise I'm going to end up taking a second bathroom break. Ubisoft is going to reveal Rainbow Six Siege X, a new era for the game, at a showcase next month. They promise widespread changes for the Rainbow Six Siege 10th anniversary, 10th year, which, yeah, I could suspect that they need to, at the very least, promise major changes, because I don't think 10 years in, more of the same is really what you're looking for. I can say, going down this hallway, this definitely feels more like some kind of Team Fortress game than what I would expect from Rainbow Six, where I would expect Rainbow Siege to be more of a realistic graphics game. I think what they're going for here, so I'm getting random ads. And what I would kind of assume that they would have gone for anyways is just more and more procedural level destruction, because I mean, that is certainly a technology that you can continue to invest in and continue to work on with probably diminishing returns. Whereas I think only so many new operators, is what I think they're called, can be added. Only so many new gadgets, only so many new weapons can be added. Level design. If they made a whole bunch of level maps, that would be great, I'm sure. But yeah, maybe some different gameplay modes might be useful. But then there also might be a case that if they make too much content that splits the player base, there won't be enough people playing certain classes, or there won't be enough people playing certain maps. It'll just be harder and harder to actually get into a game. It might also be a case where they may just be cracking down so severely on bots that there's less and less people to actually play with you. I'm pretty sure Rainbow Six also is one of these games that has cracked down on a lot of the player base for being offensive in chat or otherwise, and as such, their player base may have shrunk some too. But I guess all we have right now is a tease, so there's no real reason to talk about it too much until we see some real content. This is a story I think we've already talked about. Square Enix pulled the iOS Final Fantasy game and iOS Final Fantasy game because it can't fix a DLC bug. Alright, it says it can't fix the DLC bug. I don't see a reason why you really couldn't fix it though. Players can access paid content in Crystal Chronicles Remastered, including the full game unlock. Which, yeah. That sounds like the kind of problem that should never really happen, particularly since money is being involved. And it does sound like Square Enix is probably either just blaming Apple and iOS, which maybe they do deserve some blame, but it also seems like Square Enix may just be being lazy. And then for our final Video Games Chronicles story, Avalanche's founders new studio is making layoffs, but will continue to work on its new IP. This would be Christopher Sundberg's Liquid Swords cutting jobs to ensure the studio's long-term sustainability. Which, man, sometimes these headlines are really problematic in that they want to get a big recognizable search engine optimized name in the headline when it really doesn't belong there. The proper English way to do this would have been to say Liquid Swords is making layoffs to continue work, but will continue to work on a new IP. Then say Liquid Swords was founded by Christopher Sundberg, founder also of Avalanche. Probably don't even put that in the subheadline, probably put it in the text itself. But yeah, we're still getting news of layoffs here and there. Not a lot of news these days, but even one layoff is one layoff too many in my opinion. So, generally speaking at least. So yeah, it's not like I think that the gaming industry is out of a bubble and is in some kind of growth period in this and is even really sustainable. I still think the video game industry and the economy in general is probably in a major bubble still waiting to be burst. Although inherently, at some point, these bubbles do seem like they just solidify and become real too. But yeah, there is room for more pain economically, I think, still, and there will be room for more pain, I think, economically for a long time. And not really seeing any real hopeful possibilities and outcomes. Moving on to the Gematsu articles. Did close that one. I assume my macro opened all the news story today. Hopefully. We'll just have to assume it did. So, Promise Mascot Agency demo is now available for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. It's an 80-minute trial of open-world mascot management crime drama. A very weird combination of descriptors, for sure. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 sales have topped 2 million. We'll leave it at that. Bleach Rebirth of Souls has yet another character trailer for Tier Halle Bell. They seem to be going through the espadas in particular as far as the characters that they're announcing, which is maybe the second or third major arc in Bleach of potentially 4 or 5 major arcs, excluding the 1000 Year Blood Wars arc reboot that is, I guess, still being made. It definitely felt like the 1000 Year Blood War arc series was going to be just like one 22 episode series to wrap everything up and have an ending that is in line with the manga, which I assume the manga has ended. But it is getting drug out because of animation troubles, I think, more than anything. To be 4 seasons, it feels like. Well, not really giving particularly interesting content episode to episode, where I would say the Espada series of the original Bleach anime was more interesting than the Thousand Year Blood arc, what is or has been so far. It is also certainly kind of crazy to go around in circles as far as anime series and talk about Bleach 10, 20 years. Bleach may be 20 years old at this point as far as the first anime series. Seems like he kind of going in circles. They even, I think, saw, and take this with a grain of salt because this may have been just a Facebook fake news thing, but I think they've announced a sequel series to Death Note. Which, okay, that's weird. I also heard from a YouTuber that the Buffy the Vampire Slayer reboot has been received fairly poorly, and that YouTuber pointed out that there's actually been a long list of reboots that have only gone about 2 seasons and then been canceled, such as the Quantum Leap reboot, for example. And yeah, so if they did do a Buffy reboot, there's a danger, certainly, of it not going very long or being particularly good. And yeah, if anything, I think some of these reboots would do better if they straight up just tried to remaster and remake the best of the original series. Like, if you were going to take the good episodes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and only remake and have new actors do that, you would bring it down to maybe 2 seasons of good content. That's about it. Then that also would be fairly boring. At the very least, I guess I can say I'm happy that we haven't gotten to the point where it's just all AI generated remasters, because that is the next deeper hole that they're going to dig, is that we're going to have shows like Heroes or something, just to pick a show, where it is just going to be AI generated people, AI generated voices, maybe adding a slight sheen of animation to a show, doing the exact same dialogue and the exact same scripted experience, but this time they can sell the AI generated version of it without paying royalties potentially to any of the actors who were in the original show, and not having to pay writers or anything. That will potentially happen if TV and movie can convince people to actually watch AI generated content, which that's what they're going to push for, certainly. More and more of that. And at some level, people will probably buy into that. There almost certainly is a small group of people who would not sit through Gone with the Wind because it's black and white. If all of a sudden there's an AI generated in color Gone with the Wind, some more people might sit through that. And in the case of Gone with the Wind, they might cut it down and eliminate a lot of the fluff, speed up the speed at which people talk, and turn a very long movie into a more reasonable length movie. It's fairly believable. We've seen it with Neon Genesis Evangelion in particular, the one series that's already gotten away with that, where it has been remastered, remade, and put in different formats so many different ways, so many different times. It's only a matter of time that you start to see the West embrace that idea more too. Although anime in general doesn't do it too much, they certainly have done it more. The new Sailor Moon show compared to the old Sailor Moon show. Anyways, I'm supposed to be talking about video games, so let's move on. This show really is a bunch of potpourri as far as it's whatever I want to talk about whenever. don't. I really need the Eat the Mic producer thing there too to just stay on topic. I need a producer tapping the stay on topic phrase over and over again. It's like, focus, stay on topic. That's where the clock also might make some sense, is that if you had a minute hand that is just moving and you know you're supposed to be through segment 1 by that point, you might subconsciously speed up and be done by that point. And then you might have a ad break, live ad break, or holding for an edit for an ad break at a very specific time. And then that gives you a natural transition to, or somewhat a natural transition to segment 2. So yeah, that's particularly in part why I think it would be a good idea, is because I see the things that I need to do and can't bring myself to stay on topic and focus and do for myself. So those who can't teach effectively, which is probably true as far as me being a content creator in general, is those who can't really succeed, just because I don't have the artistic skill to make thumbnails, and I don't have any desire to do face cam or really interact with live chat people on a massive level. All of those things, if I could do them, would certainly help my channel quite a bit, but they really just aren't me. Like, if I played brand new games and talked about hot topics specifically, if I could keep myself to 10-minute videos or less on talking about a single topic, all of that would be much more mainstream style content and probably get more views, get more subscribers. Again, just not me. Anyways, I'm rambling. Blue Wednesday is coming to all consoles and PC on March 27th. I guess I've totally forgotten about the idea of chapter markers and making clips from the chapter markers. This one's already on PC and on my wishlist. Yeah. Making clips from the chapter markers was something that I was working on an automation to do, and it never really got anywhere fast. And inherently making YouTube shorts for games that come out on Steam feels like a better place to focus your attention than to try to make separate clips, particularly since you really don't promote clips. If you say clips in YouTube, most people think you're talking about shorts anyways, even though they are a separate thing. But yeah, I haven't seen anybody really embrace clips as a concept. Chapter markers, I have seen some people embrace it, and certainly for a long-running live stream like this, chapter markers would be helpful. But the only way I've seen anybody actually accomplish chapter markers is to have somebody else type them up as they watch your video and add it to the description later. That's something where I wouldn't mind if there was some AI generation happening, and there are automatic chapters that are supposed to be generated based on videos, but my live streams probably go too long for them to actually bother to do that, and the automatic chapter sections themselves have to, I think, be a little bit longer than me talking about just one headline of the game. So when I come to this and say Amusement Arcade Toplan is now available, I would like that to be a chapter marker just for that, me reading that headline. It's not saying too much in most cases, though, because what I tend to do is either read the headline and move on to the next story, or I read the headline and then go to the Steam page and look at it. Maybe sometimes I'll scroll down and look at the screenshots here if I don't find a Steam link. Yeah. In this case, actually, I think this is a mobile game only. CyberConnect 2 launches its 30th anniversary website. The Rydo and Demon Slayer developer to celebrate a milestone anniversary in 2026. Okay. Since its establishment in 1996, CyberConnect 2 developed over 30 games, including the .hack slash series, which was a big thing just by how many games they made. I'm not sure it ever was particularly that popular, but definitely led to the idea of being trapped into VR games and talking about that, which the other anime series that's newer, slightly newer, took that concept and ran with it. That being said, I can't remember the name of that anime series, so it's still not really that stuck in my mind. Let's see, they made a Little Tail Bronx series, which I don't recognize. They made the Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm series and the Dragon Ball Z Kakarot series, and Kimetsu no Yaiba, Demon Slayer, Hinokomi Chronicle series, and Fuga Melody of Steels, which I recognize all those. So that's some pretty big names, each of which have multiple iterations, which might make up the entirety of those 30 games. Let's see, is there anything interesting worth showing in this video, or is this your standard Japanese person talking to the screen? Although I wouldn't even say it's that standard, because it really just jumped into a PowerPoint presentation. I think it's worth pointing out that when you have a company that's been around for 30 years and they can get away with having somebody stand in front of a whiteboard and then projecting a PowerPoint presentation onto the whiteboard while talking to screen, that gives, or should at least give, a lot of hope to smaller people, smaller content creators, in that there's not really that need for a polish to when you are literally just trying to present ideas and get them across. Unfortunately, the truth of the matter is probably that YouTube pushes so much pressure on content creators and other streaming channels like Twitch. Well, Twitch possibly not as much. YouTube in particular puts so much competition and so much pressure on content creators that people do bend over backwards and spend way too much time polishing up their presentations. And I would say that kind of presentation is at the bare minimal. There is definitely room for improvement here, in that maybe you have the guy dress up a little bit better, maybe you frame the camera a little bit better so you're not seeing all of this visual distraction at the bottom and all of this extra empty space here. If you had framed the camera to see the whiteboard, which I assume they're just projecting video onto a blank whiteboard, and had him stand in front of the whiteboard and then either step off of the screen or eliminate him from the screen when you overlaid the actual image, that would have been a little bit more polished. Certainly you could play around with lighting some more. Effectively what they're trying to do here is a green screen thing, and it's just not really that necessary. I think people play around with the idea of green screens too much in general. And you see this presentation here, it's just one static image, and then it goes to a full screen PowerPoint, and then when you come back from the PowerPoint, it's a different static image on the screen. Although I still think it's a fake image. Yeah, there's definitely room for improvement on a PowerPoint to make it look a little bit nicer. But I've also seen people that straight up are using Notepad instead of PowerPoint, and I think PowerPoint is not super great program, or Google Slides if you want to use them and have collaborative features, which is a terrible thought. But it is a bare minimum, and it does get the text to tend to be much more readable on live streams. When you have a program that's starting with the idea that it's going to be projected on a screen that's going to be bigger or further away from the eyes of the viewer, you just start from a better starting point to get the text the right size. Whereas most presentation type software is working from the concept that you're going to have your monitor right in front of your face, only by a few inches, and thus the text is going to be much smaller. And so you start from a worse position there. Moving on, this week's Japanese game releases are Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii, and Cosmic Fantasy Memorial Collection, and more. Let's see. As far as physical and digital, the numbers are still staying very low at 4. And then digital sales fairly low today too. I want to check out Tribe 9 and see if any reviews have happened yet. But yeah, overall, I guess nothing jumping out as being particularly too interesting. This is not out for another couple days, though. Let's see. Fatal Fury City of Wolves adds Kane R and several other characters. I'm probably least knowledgeable around Fatal Fury, which is to say something, as I'm pretty unknowledgeable with all the fighting games. But I can say I definitely don't really recognize anybody other than this guy, which I think is Ken, might be his name. And yeah, I probably have seen some of these characters before, but I couldn't tell you the names or their fighting styles or anything like that. Yeah. And screenshots here even showing just big impact graphics. Just like really big impact graphics and explosions and power. It's funny, I hear a dog barking. That sounds almost like it's in my house, but I don't have a dog. I wouldn't mind having a dog, but it would be a lot more work than I'm willing to commit to. Let's see. Moving on, Hunter x Hunter Nin X Impact launches July 17th. DLC character Nefelpito has been announced. I'm going to assume that's how you pronounce that. Let's see if we can. Nope. Can't really do anything to see if anything is going on, although it doesn't matter, it's just a barking dog. It is a shame, but the reality is that if somebody had a heart attack and died and their pet dog was just barking, the dog would have to bark for 2-3 hours straight to get anybody's attention. It's just not a good communication warning system there. So yeah, if you fell down and had a heart attack, Like, unless your dog has been specially trained to call 911 on a landline phone, yeah, it's not going to help you, and you're much better off having some kind of health monitoring service. I've fallen and I can't get up type alert instead. For most people who are genuinely healthy, best thing to do is to always keep your cell phone on you. Even someone who's somewhat unhealthy and in a danger of having a heart attack or falling down can usually get away with the concept of just having your cell phone always within arm's reach or on you. Clearly, you can't have a cell phone in the bathroom where many slips and falls happen, in a bathtub, for instance, but you can have it near a bathtub, on the ground, perhaps a side table, a low side table next to a tub. You have to think about where you would actually fall there. But in most other cases, you just keep it on you or keep it near you. And when I'm doing rewiring and electrical, even though I'm turning off the circuit breakers, I'm still, whenever doing these little remodel projects, making a special effort to have my cell phone somewhat close to me, just in case something becomes energized by some miracle weirdness, or I just trip over my own feet and fall during the process, because this is all very awkward stuff I'm not used to doing. Better safe than sorry. That is one of the few things where you actually still need a phone service for. Of course, that has nothing to do with video games. I am rambling today a lot. Yeah, we're in danger of being a 3.5 hour stream when really this should have been a 3 hour tight stream at most. Grand Blue Fantasy Versus Rising DLC characters have been announced. 3 new characters that I would have no idea who they are. Galleon, Wellness, Meg, and Ilsa. Yeah. And I guess we'll leave it at that. Under Night in Birth 2, Sis Celeste DLC characters Ogre launches February 19th for the PS4 and 5 and PC, and then February 26th for the Switch. It's odd to have different launch days for a DLC character, though. I can only assume that is just because they are spending less time optimizing the Switch version, and they just don't have enough team to get it all released at the same time. I don't think the other consoles, PS4 and 5 and PC, would pay for exclusivity or to exclude Switch in any way. Yeah. So I assume they just prioritized. Burrito has its 2025 trailer. I feel like we already looked at this one. Yes, we did. This was the weird game inspired by the traditional Bornean mythology. Weird probably being the wrong phrase to use there. Unique, excitingly unique is perhaps a much better way as far as a phrase to use. But yeah, certainly I don't think I've ever heard of any other video game trying to touch on Bornean mythology. And so I'm slightly excited by this game in that aspect, although not super excited because it does still just look like a JRPG type game with a slightly different art style. So I want to see more before I got really hyped on the potential release. And you also have to take it with a grain of salt because it may very well just not be particularly that good or particularly that interesting. Moving on, apparently I need to verify I'm human. This is probably old news we've already talked about. Yeah. So we don't need to worry about that. That brings us to the Gaming on Linux articles. You can now get a real-life Deep Rock Galactic mug for all your beer. Which, I guess that's video game adjacent, slightly. AI is everywhere and AI confidential, and it's your job to fix all the robots. And there's a demo, so promoting another game. I don't want to get rid of gaming on Linux as a news source, but you have to really admit they promote too many games and don't talk about the Linux stuff as much. There's a level of filtering that I think I would do if it weren't for the fact that a lot of these games are things I somehow am missing. Super Debt, for instance, is either something that just came out today or just got announced today and got a Steam page today, or something that I missed completely. And there might be a reason why I'm missing it completely. I might be ignoring games that don't have an actual release date. No, I'm not doing that. At one point I considered doing that, but no, I never really set it up that way. So yeah, all I can either assume is I missed this one, and that's why it's not on the follow list, or it just came out today. Final Outpost is hoping for mobile to PC, or hopping over from mobile to PC, not hoping, with a definitive edition. But yeah, I haven't really seen any game that was super successful in that case either. I'm putting all of these things on the follow list and really not doing any follow list cleanup ever. That's something I should consider just doing. Like, I don't want to get so committed that I start going back to playing video games while I'm still struggling to clean and declutter my house, but if I'm sitting around and I don't want to declutter and clean, and I don't have any other projects to work on, doing a follow list cleanup video wouldn't be the worst thought ever. I don't even know if it really needs to be a video though. It might just be something to do off screen. Let's see, check out the demo for Replicube, an open-ended programming puzzle game from Wallabear. Interesting, intriguing concepts as a fan of puzzle games. That being said, what it looks like to me is not something that's particularly interesting. I don't even know what this is. Is this some kind of Rubik's Cube thing you program, or what? Yeah, the description here is not really showing me enough. See what the video looks like. I don't typically watch these videos, but immediately this feels to me like this is a lot of text. Okay, I think I get it now. They literally are making you program in kind of a basic mathematical thought. They're making you program what the voxels appear where mathematically. Which I have to say, this is probably not how people would make voxel games in the real world or reality, to just map it out mathematically like this on an XYZ grid and then return specific numbers as colors, which return 7 doesn't really equate to any real color reference that makes sense. Almost certainly you would make a voxel based 3D model in a 3D modeling software to create that kind of visuals. So yeah, I'm thoroughly unimpressed by what this is, and I'm not even sure it's really in any way actually educational. It feels like you're having people do something that almost is like programming, but is in a lot of ways the absolute worst way to do programming, just to satisfy this goal, which is not anywhere close to a goal you'd actually have in programming or video game in any other case. So yeah, I am unimpressed by that game. Moving on, Yeti, formerly called Mindtest, version 5.11 is out now with in-game settings menu and better server browser. This is, I believe, a Linux Minecraft server manager of some sort. Touchscreen support is interesting. So yeah, for people in the know, as far as Mindtest and Yeti, updates are probably exciting. For others, probably less exciting. A whole lot of people picked up a shovel for a game about digging a hole. This is the one I saw Captain Sparkles do on a second live stream channel as far as digging a hole. And yeah, it's just kind of a shame that it just ends and it isn't as much procedurally generated. There is a New Game Plus mode to it that would give you a couple hours of gameplay, but I don't think, unless they update it, there's an infinite mode, or that they're going to add new content where you can go deeper. There's an encouragement here to dig straight down that you don't have in Minecraft. I want to see what the average playtime is. Let's see, just 4 hours, 2.4 hours, 23 hours is kind of high, 3 hours, 3 hours, 1.7 hours, 3 hours, yeah, 67 hours. Some of those numbers could be higher than they actually are if somebody just left the game running. It does seem like if you exclude the really extreme ones, the one negative review here saying it's rather short. In-game is kind of pointlessly abrupt and different from what you've been doing up until that point. From what I saw too, because there's a certain point where you get into just this cave system and you're just chased by giant mole rats and you can't really use your digger to attack them or use your jetpack, which this game has a jetpack, to fly away from them. You're just kind of running away and avoiding them, and it makes the game feel a little bit more like Hello Neighbor than it does Minecraft. Yeah, there's definitely room for a lot more variety in the kinds of dirt you see, and the color of the dirt and the texture, and you'd think that it could just be procedural generation where you kept on digging, or you could dig wider areas over and over again, and it really isn't. There's a little bit of procedural generation, but that's about it. So really, I feel like this is a game that by the time I got around to actually thinking about playing it, you would be done. You pick up rocks and sell them to get money to refill a always depleted battery, and then you get money to upgrade your battery and your jetpack and your inventory as far as how many rocks you can hold, and your shovel as far as how big you dig. Dynamite doesn't really work well. It doesn't make a big enough explosion. And lamps are just to light your way. Fairly quickly, you're going to have more than enough money to have everything upgraded and everything the way you want it. You have a health bar for basically no reason. That you only heal by spending money, and you take fall damage is really the only thing that hurts you. And this is a example of a game jam game that was a game jam like game that was only made in a couple hours. It seems like that, where it definitely feels like more thought, more polish should have been put into it. And undoubtedly we'll start to see clones of games like this that are in themselves clones of Minecraft as a concept to some level. And I wouldn't be surprised if the clones start to be a little bit better than what this first version, this game is going to be. Let's see, the beautiful diorama builder Tiny Glade has added controller support, which makes it, I imagine, even easier to play on PC and possibly even Steam Deck. You can see Tiny Glade is overwhelmingly positive. A Steam Deck update gets a small battery life boost with the frame limiter. I just heard a thunk at my door. I think that's probably a package being delivered. I think a single thunk would not be an indicator of somebody trying to get my attention. Yeah. Fortunately, all my cameras are for some reason down at the moment. I think the battery backup shut down while I was had the power cut off, and I needed to go press the button and didn't. It is interesting to get a Steam Deck update with a battery life boost. Definitely what people would like. Some people maybe don't want a frame limiter, but maybe it actually doesn't really change how it's been performing since previously. We still are really getting to the point though where updates that we're seeing right now for the Steam Deck and SteamOS are going to be fairly minimal, and it's going to be waiting until we see a SteamOS 3.7 or 4.0 where we'll see the big improvements happen, which I think most people would be more satisfied if they moved to a 4.0 with a proper installer than if they just added a few features that a lot of people are not going to be too interested in going to 3.7. There are increasingly more and more new versions of KDE for the desktop mode that could be installed, and there's increasing new versions of Wayland that could be updated and installed, but even all of those combined still may not be that interesting if they went out of their way to embrace those concepts over making a 4.0 version. Moving on, let's see, you can get over 30 games including Hard Space Shipbreaker right now with Prime Gaming. Always have to point out though, none of which will be Steam links as far as your long list here. Some of this might also be older news that we've already covered, like Bazite Linux has seen some nice growth thanks to great handheld PC support. Metal Gear Solid Snake Eater releases in August. The Codeberg, a open source nonprofit platform, is suffering from hate campaigns due to far-right forces, it says. We talked about that before. Tomb Raider 2 open source re-implementation adds Linux support. And then here's all the Steam sales, which this is something I need to act more on later. A Days Gone remaster has been announced. And then a workaround for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth on Linux with NVIDIA GPUs has been found. That would bring us to GameDeveloper.com, but I really only have like one story, and I think it's one story we've already covered, which is that Square Enix is scrapping the iOS version of Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles over a quote unfixable bug. And then that's going to bring us to all the new games on Steam, right at the 3-hour mark, which tells me if I burn through this, maybe this will only take about 30 minutes and then we'll be done for today. Which, yeah, maybe I'll accomplish something today, probably not too much. I'm waiting for yet more equipment to arrive in a lot of cases. And with President's Day, deliveries I think are going to be somewhat delayed. In general, I'm just not really expecting to accomplish too much at all for the next kind of... This is a weird name and a weird looking game that I have to say no to. I'm not expecting to accomplish too much in the next week or so. And one of the things I do need to do is order groceries. Get around to that. That's possibly something I'll do. A dog-themed Vampire Survivor game. Still gonna say no to it. It is funny that you get to this point where there are lots of clones of things like Vampire Survivors, and yet there's seemingly very little actual interest in any of the clones, and it just becomes a case where you have things constantly getting made in the hopes that maybe it would get a few sales, and that's kind of unlikely. This is a getting over it clone, an up clone, both of which were talked about a lot when they first came out, but aren't really relevant now. I guess that's a long-winded way of saying that the asset flippers and the low-effort game developers just never stop. There is some level of commitment there, or just stick-to-itiveness. There. And yeah, if I wasn't so generous as far as what I'm willing to give a chance to, I would probably close almost every game that comes out on Steam. It wouldn't be 100% easy to curate all these new games, but it wouldn't be particularly too hard either, because this is a lewd looking game. It looks like that probably should be in the adult section. But yeah, I could certainly limit myself to games actually talked about by some of my news sources as the only games that I would even make YouTube shorts on. Of course, that completely eliminates the possibility of finding a hidden gem, which you just kind of, I personally just want to kind of live in a hope that there are some hidden gems out there. But I have to also admit that I don't have the time or money to play any of the games to figure out if they're hidden gems or not. And yeah, if I did have the capability of doing deep dives on some of these clone games, there's a small possibility that some of the clone games are doing something better than the original versions of those games. That being said, it kind of doesn't even really matter, because then the clone games themselves don't get enough attention from other gamers, so they just never become relevant. They don't get even 30 user reviews. Cage of Roses here might be an indication of something that was targeting Valentine's Day, and you would have thought that there would have been several romance visual novel type games that would have come out on Valentine's Day, and not really. Didn't have any other kinds of Valentine's Day themed games either, which, if you're gonna make silly garbage games, a game where you're shooting out like candy hearts at people wouldn't be the worst idea on Valentine's Day. But I guess nobody really cares that much about it. There's a boys love dating sim, which we don't see too many of those on Steam outside of the adult section. Boys love being the Japanese phrase for younger guys dating each other. I think it's younger guys specifically. It may not be. It may be just all yaoi style gay on gay, guy on guy gay romances. But yeah, I would assume that boys love is supposed to be the male equivalent of otome, which is translated to young maiden, where it's a younger female protagonist seeking out usually younger male suitors. And I think there is a Japanese phrase for older male women, older female protagonists seeking out older male suitors. Yeah, alright, well, either there weren't that many games that came out, which is believable because of the holiday weekend, or my macro broke terribly. Either way, we are done for today's stream, and that did not take anywhere as long as I thought it would. So that's going to be it for this recording. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.